Hi, I'm Cal's host of The Comparable, the series in which each episode explores two companies building similar solutions in two different emerging markets. We're already halfway through our first season on episode 5, and I wanted to first take a second to thank anyone who's listened, watched these episodes, shared comments. And if you are listening or watching for the very first time, I would love for you to subscribe on any platform that you listen or watch your podcast. Please rate, please spread the word. This is a pure labor of love. And sometimes you feel like you're speaking to a vortex. Like, is anyone here? Like Mary Bueller-like? And I'm really grateful anytime anyone shows any love back to us. So thank you. Getting back to this. For our 5th episode, we're spotlighting 2 e-commerce platforms that are working to unlock a massive consumer base in their respective markets. CityMall in India and DealCart in Pakistan. 2 points to make here. The first one is a disclaimer that we are an early investor in DealCart. We, being IDI Ventures, we're an early investor in DealCart in Pakistan. Second point to make is that obviously, these 2 companies are in India and Pakistan, which, given the histories of our countries, a lot of conflict, a lot of war, a lot of simmering tensions, especially most recently in the news. You probably wonder, why are we covering those 2 for this episode? And the truth really is, why not? We once were one country, and for anyone that pays attention, there is a lot of similarities between the Indian market and the Pakistan market, a lot of similarities amongst the consumer bases, how they operate, how they think. And so there's also a lot to learn, right? And, for those of us in the Pakistani startup ecosystem, I've been operating there for over 15 years now. There's a lot to be inspired by the Indian startup space and a lot to learn what to do, also what not to do. So there's no better time to highlight them and also showcase so many of the commonalities than with this episode looking at DealCart and CityMall. We actually plan to cover quick commerce, which is, the sexy hot thing and around the world and especially in emerging markets. We plan to cover that in a future episode. But CityMall and DealCart are actually decidedly not quick commerce. In Pakistan, we break up socioeconomic segments, calling them SEC B, C. And in India, it's often referred to as India 1, 2, and 3, and beyond. And so while quick commerce caters more to a higher income segment who care more about convenience, like, in Pakistan, SEC A, India 1, these companies, DealCart and CityMall, are more focused on capturing a much larger middle income segment who are value conscious, who care more about the price of their products versus how quickly it gets to their doorstep. And while there's a much larger amount of these users, many of them, in the case of CityMall and DealCart, are transacting online for the very first time, which makes capturing them a really complex and difficult task. It's a really meaty problem to solve. CityMall was established in 2019 in India by Angad, Kikla, and Naisheel Verdhan, and it aims to bridge the gap in e-commerce access for an estimated 300 to 500 million underserved consumers outside major urban centers in India. They've raised around $112 million from funds like Excel and Sequoia. They were first known as a social commerce play, popularizing a community leader model that included a decentralized supply chain and virtual Kirana stores or mom and pop shops. They more recently moved away from this model, centralizing their supply chain and as they move towards profitability. We'll get into that in this episode, how their consumers behave, why they're maybe not social in the social commerce play anymore. And we'll get into that and more with co-founder Angad Kikla. DealCart in Pakistan launched in 2022, founded by Haider Raza and Ammar Naveed, who were both previously part of Careem, the Uber competitor in MENA, which was later acquired by Uber and really spun off, what was called in terms the Careem mafia of people that were really key operators in this really amazing company that then went on to launch their own companies. And Ammar and Haider are really great examples of 2 amazing founders that were part of that Careem story. Originally, DealCart was inspired by Pinduoduo in China, and they also began their journey similar to CityMall as a social commerce play. I keep putting quotation marks because I feel like it's important for us to break down what that means, and we will do that in this episode. And they aim to transform how Pakistan's middle-income households, millions of them, shop by offering high-quality, low-priced, everyday essentials through an online platform. They've raised over $7 million in funding from funds like Sharuk, Sturgeon Capital, Asadai Ventures, FGV, more, and are currently focused on capturing the Karachi market with plans to scale really soon to other cities. They also recently launched a food delivery vertical, announced a partnership with global player Yango, and really have this vision to kind of be this full-service e-commerce platform. We'll talk more about cracking this really exciting Pakistan opportunity with co-founder Ammar Naveed in this episode. And we're experimenting a little bit on how we format these episodes. In past episodes, if you've listened and watched, we've also done an investor segment. And while that's been really great, we're going to experiment with making this a little bit more shorter, more bite-sized. The conversation with Ammar and Angad, it's such a meaty, interesting conversation that hopefully that's going to be how we do it in the future. And we'll end with me kind of from an investor lens perspective, talking about some of my big takeaways. So let's get into it.
We're joined today by the founders of two pioneering e-commerce platforms. Angad Kikla, co-founder of CityMall in India, and Ammar Naveed, co-founder of DealCart in Pakistan. While quick commerce startups center on consumers more focused on convenience, these companies are focused on a much larger segment of both of their populations. The millions of middle-income consumers that are value-conscious, that prioritize price over convenience, and who often are transacting online for the very first time. While these companies are addressing really large segments of their population, truly capturing these users can be a difficult and complex task, and I'm really looking forward to digging deeper into both CityMall and DealCart with both of them to understand how both of their models have adapted and evolved over the years. It's also great, given our histories and recent events, to have an episode that brings Pakistan and India together in a positive and hopefully constructive way. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Kulsum, for inviting us.
Yeah, happy to have you. Angad, the first question is for you. I was at a conference recently where an Indian VC said that quick commerce is India's fastest growing segment ever, citing a 24x in gross order value over the last 3 years. CityMall is not quick commerce, and you're in fact targeting a very different segment in India, which is more like the India 2 and 3. And you're someone who has started other companies before launching CityMall. So it could have been much easier to kind of come in and address this India 1 demographic and kind of ride this quick commerce wave. But you instead chose to address a much larger, but also harder to capture customer base in your market, a customer focused on value over convenience. Can you just share a little bit more about the why behind CityMall and how has the vision changed since you first launched it in 2019?
So yeah, you're right. It would have been, much simpler focusing on India 1, the more affluent consumer base. But we were, when we started, we were just super excited about the scale and the enormity of the unmet need that exists in the middle India, which is the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 consumers. And just that vision and excitement around building something for the largest customer segment, the belly of India, and the most important need, which is value grocery, is something that kept us going. And in a way, we were built on a very simple vision and insight that Indian consumers, the largest part of the Indian consumers, prefer value over convenience. And that vision has remained the same. And it's a huge unmet need that we are focusing on. From a vision perspective, it hasn't changed from day one. It's been the same. While the vision has remained the same, the approaches have evolved. I'm sure we will talk about it later. But yes, the approaches have evolved while the vision has remained the same throughout from day zero.
Ammar, DealCart launched in 2022 and is similarly and decidedly not quick commerce, which is actually why we invested in you guys back in 2022 as well. You similarly believe that most Pakistani users are value conscious and not convenience focused. Can you share a little bit more about why DealCart exists in your vision? And you were at Careem before this and worked on operations at a really large scale. How did that help you in building something like this? And also, what surprised you that you learned for the very first time in building DealCart?
Sure. So I think I'll start off with the macro trends first for Pakistan. A normal household spends around 40 to 50% of their monthly expenditure on groceries. So if we're talking about quick commerce, that means you're paying for that convenience and the price point gets high. So an average household, for an average household, that just doesn't make sense that they'll be paying a higher price point for it. The second thing we realized was in Pakistan, since GDP per capita incomes are so low, as you kind of build a quick commerce setup, it is very expensive and someone needs to pay for it. There's a lack of capital in Pakistan relatively. So that means you can't have a very high burn, high growth model working in Pakistan. And the second is because incomes are so low and a major part of your expenses are on groceries, we don't believe customers will be willing to pay for it. So yes, probably the top 1% of the country might be okay with quick commerce and paying for that convenience. But since there's such a large chunk of the expenditure is going on groceries, our core thesis remains that people will look for affordable way to kind of get their groceries delivered at home. So the other macro trend in Pakistan that is changing is that there's a lot of digitization that is happening. So roughly, I think 50% of the population is already on the digital networks. So we are where India was back in 2021, roughly, in terms of digitization. So people are coming on the internet, they're using their social media. So the next eventual step is that they'll start shopping online. And once they start shopping online, their habits change. And our core thesis is that they look for value deals. Now, coming back to your questions on the things that I learned at Careem. So while I was doing their food and looking at the grocery delivery business, just to have multiple dark stores open, it's a very capex heavy model. And then you need to have riders or captains over there to deliver those products to the customers. Until a point you get to a very highly densely operated zone in which you're able to utilize those riders to the maximum, the entire supply chain becomes very, very expensive to manage. What we wanted to work was you have a price point that you want to get to the products to the customers and then work backward from there. So for example, if you want to say charge 100 rupees to the customer for the final product, what does the supply chain need to look like? And in that entire value chain, you can't have dark stores sitting in because the cost structure kind of increases and inflates a lot. So how we work similar to CityMall is we work from one warehouse and just try to optimize each and every part of the supply chain so that we can pass on the benefits to the customers.
Was there anything, I mean, we talked about like what Careem taught you, right, in terms of how you learn on that side, but like what was, because I feel like when you build your own company for the very first time, and especially doing what you're doing, which is kind of focus on a very mass market consumer, what were the things that really surprised you in building DealCart?
So a couple of things. The number one is affordability and price really resonates with the customers overall. And just to kind of beat that price, you kind of need to work on the cost structure a lot. I'll just give you an example, right? We don't work from fancy offices. We actually work from the warehouse. So at every point in this supply chain, you have to cut your cost to pass on that value to the customer. That is one. The second thing is roughly 62% of our customers are transacting on any e-commerce platform for the first time. And generally, when this behavioral change is happening, what happens is customers don't trust these online players or new players that come in, right? So the first 2-3 order experience has to be top notch. Because if you have a bad experience with the customer in the first few orders, they don't just lose trust on you, they kind of lose trust on the entire ecosystem. So for us, it's new customers coming on the platform, they need some hand-holding, and the experience needs to be there in order for them to kind of trust our platform in particular, and then generally the e-commerce as well.
Very cool. I see a lot of nodding from Angad, and I feel like there's probably a lot here that resonates. I'm curious for you because, Ammar was talking about, centralizing their logistics into their warehouse. You guys actually started and had pioneered a really different model before this. You operated on a community-led social commerce model, which relied on micro-entrepreneurs, who were your community leaders to drive sales and last mile delivery. About a month ago, I think you did much longer ago, but in terms of when you publicly announced it, you announced a pivot away from this model and you started to streamline your supply chain and focus on a more centralized delivery model. So I'm curious about, just given how much the community-led model was something that you talked about before, can you talk a little bit more about this pivot and why it happened and what's happened as a result of that?
Sure. So yeah, very interesting. I was hearing Ammar and I could relate to a lot of things that he just shared. See, we started pre-COVID and India e-commerce before COVID and after COVID were like two very different things. When we started before COVID, The biggest problem was that there were not enough users who were transacting on e-commerce. So the number of e-commerce users were not as high. These users were largely concentrated in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns. And we started with the thesis that if we are to get these users on e-commerce, we need to solve the problem of trust. And in order to solve for the problem of trust, we started this community leader model, which was you work with local entrepreneurs who will drive sales on one side and also do the fulfillment on the other. Forward to post-COVID era, what we realized is that the country has changed. Almost everybody was on e-commerce. People were buying fashion, electronics, all sorts of products on e-commerce. So the country was on e-commerce, from the smallest of towns to the rural India. People knew how e-commerce works. So luckily for us, the problem of trust was not a problem anymore. But the bigger problem in the country was, while people were transacting online, they were not buying the most important category, which is grocery online. We realized, to solve for groceries, you need to solve for supply chain and supply chain cost. And from there, the evolution became very clear that we do need, local entrepreneurs. We still have them community partners, but instead of them driving sales, they are now our partners for building the lowest cost supply chain fulfillment model. So they essentially work like, the digital kiranas who are doing fulfillment at an extremely low cost, getting their, livelihood and money out of work out of CityMall. Yeah, so that's largely been the evolution. But like I said, it's the same consumer solving for the same value before convenience tenet, but a very different approach to do it.
It also makes it a lot less, like streamlining it just makes it so much less complex, right? Because I feel like having the community leader model, as much as that's great in terms of building trust, added a huge layer of complexity to what you guys were doing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it just becomes more scalable.
Totally. Ammar, I would love for you to comment on this too, because, and again, as a disclaimer, I'm an investor in you guys, so I've kind of witnessed some of these experiments take place, but you guys did actually experiment with this community leader model, obviously really different because you guys are just in Karachi, which is obviously a very metropolitan city. So I'm curious about that experiment for you guys. Like, how did that go? Why did you move away from that and really focus on, I'm assuming for a similar reason, but would love to hear a little bit of the behind the scenes from that experiment for you guys.
Yeah, so we did kind of experiment with it probably a year and a half ago. And how we were different was, again, we are just based out of Karachi, so it's a smaller area to cover. And the community leaders that we built was to they were doing actually both things, driving sales and then also acting as a drop-off point. What we realized was that our own supply chain, because we're just in one city, if we're able to get enough density, we don't need to work with the community leaders. Our main motivation to kind of have them was not on the supply chain part, but more so on the customer acquisition part. But the more we kind of work with them, we realized that we wanted to go ahead and do it ourselves in terms of digital marketing and customer to customer referral, rather than just a community leader working as a referrer on the ground. So what we kind of did differently was there's a very strong referral program within the app. So we don't need community leaders for it. Like every customer in itself is a leader that they can choose to be, and then they can share their referral code with others and get others on board. So we thought that was a more scalable model rather than just having, say, X number of community leaders working for us.
And even though, Karachi it's a smaller area than obviously what CityMall is working with, but it's a very densely populated, hard city to kind of operate in. And in some ways, it's kind of, I feel like often what we think is that if you can crack a city like Karachi, it's much easier to crack other places in the country. And curious for you guys, like, how have you, first of all, managed the complexity of a city like Karachi, but also, you guys have both touched on the issue of trust. How have you thought about trust and building trust with these consumers?
Yeah, so for us, it was, again, like I said, the first few experiences, I think that defines the entire user journey. What we realized was if a customer has successfully completed 3 orders and they went perfectly well, the customer was, I think, 70% more likely to stay back on the platform. And if you kind of look at the entire customer chain, right, 60% are new customers, 65%. And if you don't give a good experience, like I said, they just churn away. So for us, building that trust is not, for example, someone sitting next to you as a customer and saying, okay, this is a very good app. Yes, word of mouth helps a lot. But the actual experience that the customer kind of goes through, for us, that was super important. That is one of the reasons why at the start we were thinking about, do we keep the logistics in-house or do we outsource it to someone? And I think you and I had this discussion, and we had it with some other investors as well. The reason we wanted to keep it in-house was we wanted to own that experience to the customer. Anywhere that experience kind of breaks, we don't want the customer, because for the customer, it's just they've ordered from DealCart. They don't care who's the logistics partner. So for us, that became very important to own the end-to-end experience. And that's how we kind of went ahead with. So for us, the first 3 order user experience is very important. And a subset of that is just making sure the entire supply chain to the customer is kind of very tightly governed and owned by us. The other thing that kind of worked for us in terms of getting customers to trust us is the quality of the products. It's very easy to go out and say, yes, we're the cheapest platform out there. But a lot of customers, they kind of get this sense, okay, if this is cheap, the quality of the products would be not the best, right? So kind of managing that communication with the customer that, yes, it is cheap and affordable, but the quality is top notch. And then making sure you kind of govern the quality of the product itself. I think that plays a very important part, because groceries is something that, again, you're spending a lot of money on compared to the total income of the household. You don't want to mess that up. And the last part that I would kind of touch upon is having very customer-friendly policies when it comes to returns and other stuff. And again, this kind of goes back to a lot of kind of inspiration that we take from Amazon, that unless you're able to build that customer trust, that flywheel doesn't kick in. So these are the 3 pillars that we kind of work towards to build trust in the communities that we're working in.
Yeah. Angad, you're nodding a lot. I'm sure there's so much that resonates with what you guys are doing at scale. Has there been anything from your side that you wanted to add here?
Yeah, just to add on this, I think as we sort of acquire consumers directly, digitally and directly, we realize that consumers come with an entire distribution of needs. While the core need is value over convenience, but there are some users who are more value conscious, some who are lesser. So getting that entire engine around segmenting the users and identifying what are those characteristics, who is more value conscious, who is more conscious on a category A versus category B. So the entire segmentation piece becomes, at least for us, has become like central theme around how do you make the entire flywheel work for each, let me call it like a sub-segment of users.
Very cool. We're talking about this user base as a monolith. Obviously, they're not, right? But, we're talking about middle income, price conscious user base. They typically have like small average order values, right? When you're working in the space that you guys are. There's also a lot of competitors in both of your markets. So it can be a race to the bottom sometimes when you want to try to offer the best deals, the best prices. And that can be a nightmare for the economics of these models. And we've seen that, where so many companies have just gone bust because, they were trying to outcompete in the markets that they're in. Considering that you both are focused on and have achieved unit profitability, Angad, I noticed that when you made the announcement of the shift away from the community-led model, that was also a big reason for it. I'm just curious about the economics and how you both make it work. And so curious for both of you, maybe Angad, if you want to go first, and then Ammar, how did you really get to that, thinking about the unit economics and really kind of moving towards profitability?
Sure. So yeah, you're right. We can't sort of discount our way through this customer segment. That's a race to the bottom. What we realize is that there are like 2-3 tenets, I would say, that really drive profitability for us. One is, structurally being super low on your cost structure. And that means it has to be something structural. It cannot be like, I'm working harder to sort of get my costs down. It has to be extremely structural. So for us, we identified 2 things. One is, carve out the largest cost elements in any supply chain, which is your cost of last mile delivery and the cost of bulk breaking, and sort of outsource that piece to somebody who is ready to do it at a much lower cost because of a lower opportunity cost of time for that person. In our case, these are the community partners. And the second thing around it is actually hyper batching the entire supply chain. Because we are a next day delivery model and we don't have to work backwards from a 10-minute delivery. It gives us a lot of opportunities in the supply chain to hyper batch from process to process, from warehouse to middle mile to last mile. And that really cuts the cost down. And then obviously there is aspect around being disciplined about cost, doing the right things culturally as a company. But yeah, being like the lowest cost is a supremely important tenet for us. The second thing is actually getting the category mix right. In the sense, private labels play a big role. For us, it's the largest sort of growing portfolio in our categories. So private labels is an extremely important role in driving that profitability up. Also, things around non-grocery, which is home, kitchen, the general merchandise category becomes super important. So how do you sort of maneuver that category mix to make that economics work is the second part. And third, like I said, is sort of hyper segmenting the consumers. That's where we're still finding a lot of opportunities to sort of do it more efficiently, be more relevant to larger user base.
Mm-hmm. Ammar, would love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I think for Pakistan, we don't have a lot of money thrown at our market. It's an uphill battle, so there really isn't the luxury of, not saying that, I think Angad, the fact that you guys are focused on that, I think is amazing. For us, it's like there really isn't a choice. You have to do that because no one's going to invest in Pakistan. Like a lot of people won't right now, but especially if you're going to be a high burn model that will always be capital intensive, it's really important to build that sense of like good economics into the model. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah. Before we start, I would just like to kind of point out Pakistan as a market, right? So yes, it is not in the radar right now, but if you take a 10-year view of this in the next 10 years, even today we're the third biggest under 30 population in the world. I think there's India, China, and then there's Pakistan. So right now, again, not a lot of eyes are on Pakistan, but in the future, this is the third biggest market in terms of the under 30 population. This population is becoming increasingly tech savvy, so the opportunity remains. So the idea is that, yes, we want to scale, but right now there's not a lot of cash coming into Pakistan. And that's, like you said, a hard fact and not a choice that we had to live by. So in terms of unit economics, almost a year ago, we realized that at a unit economics or a variable cost level, we need to be profitable. So that's, I think almost a year ago, we achieved that. Now we're kind of hoping for that in the next 2.5 quarters, we should be EBITDA profitable. And to do that, I think Angad kind of segmented the two parts of the P&L very accurately, right? One is the OPEX part, which is your supply chain, the cost of the team, just frugality as a value that you instill in the entire culture you're kind of building. I think that is super important for us. The second thing is just improving your top line margins. What's very, and I think I was just listening to Angad, and those are the exact same things that we're doing. Focusing on private label, which means that you kind of go back into the categories and try to get more vertical margins out of those businesses. So private label is super important. We've launched our marketplace, which is essentially electronics, fashion. That kind of adds to the mix with the higher margin SKUs. That is super important for us. The third thing, and I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure Angad is doing that, is just on the marketing revenue. A lot of brands that we work with, we are providing them with a lot of visibility on the app and on our social media pages. So we work very closely with brands in terms of generating advertisement revenue from them. So these are the three things that we kind of push on the margin front to increase our margin. On the warehousing and cost, because we're just one warehouse, logistics and deliveries are happening the next day. Batching optimizes our operations cost significantly. I was just going through some numbers, and we're probably 60-70% cheaper than a quick commerce setup. So there are a lot of savings that we kind of generate in that supply chain. And then if you come down the P&L, it's just the size of the team, the habits of the team, on how much you're kind of spending over there. I think in a business like ours, that is a very important part that needs to be controlled, because I think everything, the kind of customers that we're trying to go after, the cost structure of that company dictates or will dictate a lot on how big the company becomes and how successful it becomes. And for us, for me and my co-founder Haider, it was a very significant mind shift. I was coming from Careem and Uber. Uber is notorious for kind of burning their way through cash to make a better business, and we spent like 6 years over there, right? So changing that mindset very quickly, that is something that we had to do because in Pakistan. And I think there were a lot of learnings on where money can be wasted, and let's make sure we don't waste money on that. Just to share some examples, even when we had to buy office for our furniture, we make sure we go after second-hand furniture. And these are not just things that you do, but I think this kind of instills a very strong culture within the team that money is not to be wasted. In a market like Pakistan, it's a trust that investors are giving you. Yes, there's a failure of a startup is very high, but let's make sure we kind of keep that promise and invest that very wisely. And over time, you kind of build a business on strong fundamentals rather than just burning your way through. So for us, it was a very sudden shift as we kind of launched DealCart. But we've been I'm glad that the team has worked really hard to kind of make sure the discipline remains there on the economics of the business.
I'm curious for you guys, Angad, you were referring to this when you were talking about how your users shifted, right? Which was also why you shifted away from the community leader model. For a lot of your users, oftentimes this was the first time they were transacting online. They were buying groceries online. But now that you have them captured, so to say, their preferences might start shifting as well, right? As they get more comfortable with transacting online, or maybe moving away from just being price conscious or value conscious, and maybe thinking about things like convenience eventually and all of those things. How have you both seen your customers, your users change in terms of their preferences, what their wants and needs are, and how are you guys adapting for that, and how are you meeting them where they are? So maybe Angad, if you want to go first, and then Ammar.
Sure. So we start with a very basic tenet, which is the fact that all users, everybody is aspirational. Aspiration and being value conscious are two very different things. So, and we are like supremely surprised by the type of behaviors that we see on our platform by our users. But if we were to sort of distill it out, the way we've seen aspiration sort of users move up and up in their aspirational sort of funnel, I would say, is that they would start from first consuming non-branded loose products to getting purchasing more and more branded stuff. So that is one shift that we see. The second shift that we see is actually users buying products that are more aspirational in nature. So for example, on our platform, Korean noodles are a rage. Now Korean noodles per se are sort of aspirational, but because everybody is so exposed to content and the K-drama and all of that, and we see that in the behaviors of our user. So from a moving up the ladder perspective, people sort of get to start purchasing more and more branded stuff, and then they would buy more aspirational products like Korean noodles or peanut butter or so on, or whey protein and so on and so forth. And finally, the aspirational at the top end is I want super service. So I want everything in 5 minutes and 10 minutes. Our core belief is that the largest part of the country is going to be value conscious and aspirational. So as a platform, it's more about evolving how we look at our assortment. Are we being relevant to those users for those type of needs of different types of products? So that's how we look at it.
What about for you, Ammar?
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same company the more we speak on this call. But even for us, a lot of this resonates, specifically the Korean noodles part. Recently, I was just going through some of the comments, and one of the comments was that, this is the new kind of Korean noodle, I think, a bulldog or something. We want that on the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really into Korean noodles too, so I was nodding as you guys were talking. Yeah.
Yeah, so we see also customers kind of climb that ladder, but one thing that we didn't see, or we saw the opposite, was over the last 2 years, was because of very high inflation, we actually saw users downgrade. So initially, users who were still kind of buying branded stuff, they shifted towards our private label, which was the cheaper one. And we saw that happening a lot, even in the same category of different brands which are not private label. Over the last 2 years, we saw people downgrading. Again, inflation was high, wages weren't increasing or keeping at pace. So people wanted to kind of save more or save as much as they could. Over the last, I think, 7-8 months, we've started seeing that people are moving up the ladder again. So overall, I think very similar to what CityMall is kind of going through. It's just that one blip in the middle that came because of very high inflation. But overall, we are seeing very similar things. I would just like to kind of extend to what Angad was saying on the quick commerce part. And we've also launched food delivery recently. And I got this asked a lot on why did you launch food delivery? So the customers who kind of came to our platform purchasing for the first time, we started getting a lot of requests from them that why don't you guys do our food delivery for us? So that was the micro part, that customers reaching out to us. And then we did a survey. I think 92% of the customers said, please do food delivery for us. And in the context of Pakistan overall, we just have one big food player. It's a monopoly. Generally, countries have 4 to 5 big food players. In Pakistan, it's a monopoly. So it was kind of a feedback from the market as well, that they want more players in the market so that the rates can be normalized. But just going back to your point, people started off with just purchasing their groceries from us and have ultimately moved and asking themselves for different services. And that is a trend that we see happen in a significant part of our user base. So people come in, they test the service. Our first average order value is mostly very close to the minimum order value that is required, which means that the customers are just testing the service. But as they kind of build that trust, they kind of move up the ladder. And once they move up the ladder, they also want you to kind of do different services for them as well. So that's the user segmentation and behavior that we see on our platform.
Very cool. I love the point about customer preferences. Also, just given things like TikTok and social media and just kind of having, when you were just talking about like Netflix, people watching Korean dramas, like every local consumer is becoming increasingly more global in their preferences. And I think that's really cool how it's being reflected back to you guys as companies. And just as a last question for you both, and you don't have to take a long time, but just to kind of leave on this aspirational note, if you were to wave a magic wand and, look at CityMall 5 years from now, DealCart from 5 years from now, what would that company look like? Ammar, if you want to go first, you talked about launching food delivery. I know, DealCart has a wallet on the app. Like, what does DealCart look like 5 years from now?
Sure. So in Pakistan, there are not many big consumer side e-commerce businesses. So when I look at Pakistan 5 to 10 years down the line, there has to be a big e-commerce businesses in Pakistan, given the size of the population and how quickly the economy and the country is getting digitized, right? So what we believe at DealCart is we want to go for affordability as a key tenant. And then we have groceries. We want to have food on the platform. We want to have a very strong fintech play into it. We started off with wallet. We'll build more customers. We'll bring more customers on the app. And once that happens, we want to get into the fintech side. So everything that touches the lives of the customer and can help them either save money or kind of afford more luxuries and aspirations in life, that is something that we'll go after.
Very cool. Angad?
Yeah, so actually very similar. Just be the most affordable brand for the entire country. It is grocery now. It can be fashion. It can be anything. But just be synonymous to the word that, hey, here's a platform that helps me save.
Very cool. Thank you guys both so much for being here. I mean, I know that we all kind of knew that there was a lot of similarities between our markets. I think a lot of people forget that sometimes in what we talk about in the news, but this was super, super amazing, super interesting to hear kind of how you guys are building so thoughtfully. So thank you both so much for joining for today's episode.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angad. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the main segment of episode 5 with us. I wanted to share a few thoughts from an investor perspective as I ran the interview, but also as someone who's also invested in the space and specifically invested in DealCart, as I mentioned at the top of this episode. Number one, obviously, just the amount of similarities amongst their stories. I think at one point, Ammar actually said, like, you could be talking about what Angad was saying about CityMall. He could be talking about DealCart. So, that is the thesis of this podcast. So it's not surprising, but I found as an example, just given how obviously these are internet people that are just new to the internet, but just given how global the world is, someone sitting in India who has access to TikTok is probably watching and seeing, and, on TikTok or Netflix or whatever, probably seeing the same trends that someone in Pakistan is, that someone in, Georgia is, someone in, Vietnam is. And so one point that they said in the episode that I really loved was the fact that buldak noodles, as someone who loves K-dramas, this was a really hilarious point to me, that Korean fire noodles is something that, consumers are really demanding. And I think that if we were zooming out, so beyond that little nugget being super fun to me as someone who consumes Korean dramas, and appreciates that, it also to me speaks to the fact that these consumers are not static, right? And I think as much as we talk about the fact that CityMall and DealCart are not quick commerce plays, there is the fact that they're capturing this user that was maybe transacting for the first time online. There were people that probably bought groceries physically in person before. And now as they're getting more and more comfortable with transacting online, they are starting to change their preferences, right? They are not, first of all, they're not a monolith, but also they're not a static user. So their preferences are shifting. They are shifting as the world is shifting. And I think that's really interesting because it also speaks to CityMall and DealCart and how they are adapting to those users, how they're thinking about them and how they're matching the demand that they're seeing in their audience. You really can only do that as a company if you are speaking to your users and you're really paying attention and placing them really at the center of what you're offering. The second thing that I think is really interesting is, Pakistan is really defined by, I think Pakistan is a market that has enormous amount of opportunities. I think there's a huge amount that is still really fast growing addressable market. And there's still so much that hasn't been even cracked, or we've barely scratched the surface yet. And so to see, despite all of that, there's been a huge amount of funding scarcity in our market. We're still a very new nascent ecosystem, especially compared to India, where there's a lot more liquidity. So what I really admire, and obviously, again, disclaimer, investor in Ammar and investor in DealCart, so obviously admire and respect and appreciate them anyway. But what I really appreciate is their focus on the path to profitability was from day one. They knew that this was a business that could burn a lot. It was capital intensive. And so that focus, even experiments that they did when they experimented with the community leader model, as he notes in the interview, it was a quick iteration, right? They experimented, it didn't work. It obviously is very different from what CityMall did in their model, but had to move on from that because if it wasn't going to be able to help them crack and become sustainable as a business, it wasn't going to work. So I just think that's a really interesting reflection on Pakistan in terms of scarcity and the kind of founders that it breeds as a result of that. I think CityMall to me is so interesting because Angad this is not his first company that he's building, and he could easily have gone in the quick commerce, path, which not saying that quick commerce is necessarily easier to do, but it's a consumer base that might be a relatively more easy base to capture because they're already transacting online, their preferences are already there. But he had this really big vision of what he wanted to capture. And so I think seeing how they've evolved, and then also how, when they've seen how their community leader model was something that really defined them and their story for a really long time, it takes courage to move away from that in a bid for profitability. And so, they've obviously been able to do that and achieve that. And so lots of things here that I think are really interesting, especially as a venture investor, someone who studied this space. It is really capital intensive. It's really hard, but I think it takes really good founders who understand the base that they're working with, that understand how those preferences change, how consumers change, especially, as the world becomes increasingly more global. So lots to take away here. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed being part of it. And please stay tuned for future episodes of The Comparable. Thanks. Bye.